You're listening to the Justin Beahm Radio Hour.
Welcome to the Radio Hour podcast. I'm your host, Justin Beahm. Episode 30, an incredible milestone for me with this show, especially after a few years of hiatus there. To reach 30 just a couple into this new season is a thrill, and I want to thank you for tuning in, for subscribing, leaving ratings, and supporting the program. That just means the world, and excited for the next 30 here. Today's episode is going to feature an interview with Todd Sokolove, who's the head of marketing at Paramount. Todd and I work together very closely on all the different titles I do for Paramount, and we get into lots of fun territory in his interview, discussing the studio's recently new commitment to physical media, the Paramount Presents series, which was really his brainchild, his journey at other companies prior to Paramount, and of course turning back the clock to his early love for cinema and what led him to the dance. I think you're going to love this conversation and can't wait to get into it with you here in a moment. Some news for you. Finally, I can talk about the title that I have been most proud of, and that has been more than 2 years in the works here. Today, Paramount is announcing a 4K and Blu-ray release of Martin Scorsese's Bringing Out the Dead. For those of you who have been following me for any amount of time, dating way back to my earliest days on other podcasts like Attack of the Killer podcast and Land of the Creeps, where I was frequently a guest, when people would ask me what my number one wish list title was, it was always Bringing Out the Dead. I made the bold promise years ago that I would find a way to get this released, and of course I've never had that kind of power to wield. But once I got on board at Paramount, in the earliest conversations with my executive team there, back when that first occurred, I started talking about Bringing Out the Dead. It's Scorsese's lost masterpiece. It's a neglected gem that's never made it beyond DVD, which is still mind-boggling to me. And it's one that I've long maintained was absolutely worth revisiting. I don't know how many people I've turned on to this film over the years, but countless folks, countless times that I would bring it up in interviews, always boldly saying, someday this is going to happen. Well, it finally has. I want to first announce the special features that are going to be on this release, and then we'll get into the stories behind them. It's been a long, very insane road leading us to today and this announcement. So this new edition of Bringing Out the Dead is going to be, again, on 4K and Blu-ray. It's part of the Paramount Presents series, so those are always limited on initial release. So once we have the link available, you're going to want to click on it right away on Amazon to get that pre-order in, because they tend to sell out, especially on bigger titles, and the assumption is that's going to happen with this one. So, without further ado, the special features. I have brand new interviews with director Martin Scorsese, with star Nicolas Cage, with writer Paul Schrader, cinematographer Bob Richardson, and then I also worked with the Paramount Archive team to see what they had in the vaults in terms of on-set EPK interviews. And they were able to dredge up and remaster for me on-set interviews with Patricia Arquette, John Goodman, Mark Anthony, Ving Rhames, and Tom Sizemore, all of which I dressed out into individual interview pieces, because on the original DVD, there was a making of featurette it just moved at a breakneck pace. And so you just saw slivers of these interviews in that. And there's so much more story to be found there. So with the blessing of the powers that be at Paramount, the marketing team sent those files on to me, and I assembled them into standalone pieces. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 new features on there, plus existing special features from previous release, which is very, very exciting. Now, on to the story of this release. This has taken more than 2 years to bring to fruition. Initially, when we started work on this, I got Nicolas Cage and Scorsese on board from the outset. Bob Richardson shortly thereafter, and everything was in motion and everyone was enthusiastic. Cage started talking about this release in press interviews for other films he was making. So I was always surprised to have someone send me a link. Hey, guess what? Nick mentioned Bringing Out the Dead again in some new press junket that he was doing on whatever film, where he would just say something like, yeah, and the movie I've talked about the most as being this undiscovered gem, Bringing Out the Dead, is finally going to get the treatment it deserves, and I'm super excited to do this interview for it. So we knew that Cage, Scorsese, and Richardson were completely in and all on board. Instantly, it became clear that it was going to be a challenge to wrangle both Scorsese and Cage, because Cage just can't stop making films. I am such a huge fan of his. And another list topper for me, when people would ask about the dream interview, who would I love to interview the most, almost always Nicolas Cage came to mind first. I'm a huge fan of Leaving Las Vegas, of Peggy Sue Got Married. I mean, the list goes on and on. Drive Angry is another under-celebrated gem, in my opinion. He just has done so many incredible things in his career, and I just love him and was very, very excited to have him come on board for this. But he is tireless in his output, so wildly prolific. And if you follow his career even somewhat closely, you know that it's like every few months there's a new Cage picture coming out. And I am a tireless defender of his version of The Wicker Man. I absolutely adore. And I have this weird superstition with that, actually, where if I'm ever to appear in a film, I can't explain this at all, but if I'm ever, because I've had some bit parts in movies over the years, like Sharknado and Silk, No Solicitors, Animal Inside, The Trees Have Eyes, Collapse, Demonica, so on and so forth, and recently Stranded, which is a Bigfoot film. Anyway, when someone asks me to come on board, usually to die in a movie, which I love doing, I have this odd superstition where I take my DVD copy of Cage's Wicker Man with me. It's not that I need to watch it in preparation or anything like that, but it's just kind of this superstitious totem that I take with me. Maybe that dates back to hockey and all the weird hockey superstitions I have, like putting what sock on first and taping which arm first and all that stuff. I don't know. And then Scorsese had just started the production of Killers of the Flower Moon, which ended up taking a very long time. He was on board, and I stayed in touch with his people, and it was something where he never backed away from the table, but it just became a ritual of me getting in touch with his people and being told time and again, like, he's still in, but right now he's just swamped with Flower Moon over and over through additional shooting and everything else. So on both fronts, I knew that it was essential to have Scorsese and Cage involved with this, at the very least. And I never gave up hope. I tried to keep stoking the embers under the team at Paramount, who continued to believe in me, and I'm so eternally grateful to them for that. One of which is Todd, who you're going to hear on this interview today. Because at any point, they could have just said, you know what, we're going to throw this thing out there bare bones. People have been wanting it for a long time. They're just going to be happy with 4K or even Blu-ray. But they continued believing in the cause. And I have so much respect and gratitude for them for that, because I just maintained, no, I swear this will happen. It will happen. Finally, things did move into motion in like the 11th hour with this, where all of a sudden I get a call that Scorsese is available, and he's available on Friday of that week in New York City. And he has one day before he embarks on this media tour and film festival cycle with Flower Moon. And so it's like, if you can get in there, come do it. If you can't, we're sorry. It's just not going to happen. Luckily, again, a tip of my hat to the team at Paramount. everything got moved into motion real quickly. There was never any hesitation on their part about getting the pieces put together to get me into New York City and in the room with Scorsese. I fly to New York with Cindy, my executive at Paramount on this one, and we end up having this crazy 2-day hurricane of a trip where I end up in the room with Marty. Just prior to going there, I had written to Paul Schrader's people and luckily got directly through to Paul, who was totally on board for shooting because he's in New York City as well. So I booked the day to have Scorsese followed by Schrader in the same place at the same time, back to back. So I get to New York City and the interviews go off incredibly. It was absolutely amazing to be in the room with both of them. I mean, a true honor to be in the room with them and have these conversations. And interviewing Nick at his house in Las Vegas was unforgettable. I show up at the door and knock, expecting a housekeeper or someone to answer, and the door swings open and there's Nicolas Cage standing in front of me. "Justin," he says. "Nick," I say. And then he forewarns me, "I've been up all night because of the baby, so I'm very tired and I have to apologize for that." And I said, "It's the same for me," because I had been up for several days after shooting, and then we had to make an early morning trek from LA to Vegas. And he said, "Perfect. We're both on Frank Pierce time." So Frank Pierce is the lead character that Nick plays in Bringing Out the Dead, an exhausted paramedic who's at his wit's end after a spell of long nights where he hadn't saved anyone in a long time. So Nick immediately connected with that. And then he said, "I suppose you want me to move my car. Let me get that moved so you guys can bring your gear in." He moved his Ferrari out of the way. It was in an archway leading to his driveway. And then we pulled in and loaded in. Once I made my way inside his house, he said, "Let me give you the tour." And so he proceeded to take me around, showing me this enormous geode that greeted me when I entered. All around were all kinds of amazing vintage posters of Creature from the Black Lagoon and other movies. I mean, he's a total genre nerd, which was comfort food. At one point, I got a call, and my phone rang with the ringtone that I've had for a long time, which is the Haunted Mansion song, the organ song that plays when you ride the Haunted Mansion. And he immediately turned to me and recognized, "Haunted Mansion, that's great, I love it," which was kind of a neat point of connection for us. He took me on a tour, which included the bird cage, this massive bird cage in his living room. He showed me around to his blacklight room, which had been apparently newly installed under his living room. It was kind of an interesting thing. In the middle of his living room is this small spiral staircase that leads down to kind of a subterranean area. And once you hit the bottom of those stairs, you're just in this hallway that is on both sides, all sides, plastered with blacklight posters. There's no light in there but black light. And at the end of that is a very small room that has a bed and 2 chairs in it. So he was very excited to show that off. And then also I got to meet his baby, his wife, his nanny, and got to see his many fish tanks that were scattered about throughout. So, I mean, it was just incredible. We set up our equipment pretty quickly. And then Nick sat down and we had the most amazing, engrossing conversation that opened the doors to his relationships with Scorsese, his second guessing himself because of his relationship to his dad and how he may have had an influence on him getting cast in Bringing Out the Dead, onto his very cerebral approach to playing Frank Pierce in this film, and all the source material that he was referencing in that performance. So it just ended up being, I mean, you imagine these things going well, but then sometimes they exceed expectation. And I can say leaps and bounds, this exceeded that expectation. It was absolutely incredible. and a situation where you meet an icon who surpasses your hopes of their kindness, their openness. I mean, really what I would say about Nicolas Cage, for all the people who look at him as this guy who delivers these madcap performances, he's a family guy. He was most concerned about the baby. He was checking in on his family. He was very, very in tune and grounded with the whole situation there at his house, which blew me away. He did have a massive dinner table that was probably about 50 yards long. So there's that, with the massive chandelier hanging over the top of it. He had dragon gargoyles as lamps all around the place, which you will see in the piece when you buy this 4K. But beyond all that and the many birds that lived in his living room, he's just a guy. He's just someone who is there with his family in their sacred space and was kind enough to welcome us in. And it was a day that I will certainly never forget. And then it was on to Bob Richardson in Los Angeles. And it was exciting to see Bob again. I had last interviewed him for Natural Born Killers, and then we've also talked about some other Oliver Stone projects that have yet to be announced. So Bob and I already had a rapport, which was wonderful. And that was my core quartet of new features: Marty, Nick, Paul, and Bob. And once they were all in hand, it was just like, whew, okay, we're good to go. And in that interim, the archive team, as I had mentioned at Paramount, had found and sent me the files on Patricia, John, Mark, Ving, and Tom. And so I went about cutting those together too. And the whole thing came together in just an incredible way that I'm so incredibly proud of. Proud of it because of what we were able to accomplish. Proud of it for the film preservation hat that I'll put on, saying like, this movie really deserves this kind of treatment. And then also proud of it because it's something I've wanted for so long. And I feel like it's the first title, maybe since Sleepaway Camp, where I was like, this needs to happen somewhere. And I sincerely hope it does. And I've pitched it to everyone that I work with, from Shout Factory on. And it was just this thing that was kind of being kept under lock and key to a certain extent. And of course, then it's Paramount who brings it to play. So pre-orders are open as of today on Amazon. If you go to my site, justinbeahm.com, I will have the link up there for you to order this thing. It is incredible, so expansive, and not just the special features, but also what it offers, like I mentioned earlier, with the previous bonus material. And then the most important element, of course, is that gorgeous 4K. The new scan is incredible. The new sound polish is amazing. There's also the Blu-ray that comes with it for those who might not have a 4K player yet, so everybody can enjoy this thing. And it's about damn time, is what I have to say about Bringing Out the Dead. And it is my most sincere honor to have had a hand in this thing happening, and I hope you enjoy it. Other news on the Reverend front, Matinee from Shout Studios is Matinee, which streets June 25th. That includes new interviews from me with Kelly Martin, Dave Clennon. There's a new commentary with critics Drew McQueenie and Eric Vespi. There's previous special features. I have been asked a number of times, and no, unfortunately, the full Mant film was not available for this release due to a licensing issue, but everything else is there from that great previous Shout Blu-ray that came out a couple years ago. It's definitely worth picking up this 4K, but also if you want that version of Mant, you're going to want to hold on to that Blu-ray. So keep that. And that's something I really recommend with all releases, because special features are not guaranteed to port forward in the future. Oftentimes, it's a licensing situation where something may be restricted and kind of, I guess, for lack of a better term, landlocked on a DVD or a Blu-ray or whatever was originally including it. And so you're going to want to hold on to those. Like as an avid Halloween fanatic, I have kept everything from VHS through to current releases on those films because there's so many different elements that are not available outside of a single release. This is the case with Matinee, so hold on to those Blu-rays that you had from Shout if you're picking up the 4K as well. Natural Born Killers is coming out June 2nd in a Steelbook 4K from Shout Studios. On that, this is, again, a reissue of the recent 4K that came out from them that includes new interviews from me with editor Hank Corwin, producer Clayton Townsend, special effects makeup wizard Gordon J. Smith, and cinematographer Bob Richardson, who I just mentioned a few minutes ago. That's currently available at shoutfactory.com and on Amazon, and the same for Matinee with that availability. Clash and Wrath of the Titans is coming out from Arrow Video August 13th. I have several new interviews with producer Basil Iwaniak on that. That's at arrowvideo.com. Death to Smoochie Streets August 20th from Shout Studios. This one, the special features were just announced on, and in addition to previously available material from that DVD eons ago, you're going to get from me new interviews with actor Danny Woodburn, costume designer Jane Room, and composer David Newman. We did have Daniel DeVito on board for this one, but his schedule was super busy and we had some problems getting everything lined up. So while he is enthusiastic and absolutely proud of this movie, unfortunately we didn't get him in the chair. But those conversations, especially with Danny Woodburn and Jane Room, are so fascinating and insightful into the story of the making of this motion picture that is really another unheralded gem. A true, great, dark comedy that I encourage you all to check out. And again, that street's August 20th. In other news, I'm going to be part of the Snake Alley Festival of Film in Burlington, Iowa. That runs July 11th through 14th. I've been a part of this festival in years prior, and it's absolutely wonderful. If you'd like to come to the Midwest, unplug for a few days, and see a truly incredible lineup of international cinema in all categories, from animation to drama, comedy, horror, music videos. It's an amazing event that's put on by Tad Good, and he does an incredible job with it. This year, I'm doing something a little bit different, though. I'm going to be presenting The Art of the Documentary, which is a seminar on Saturday, July 13th. And I really could call it maybe more The Art of the Interview. That's going to be a special presentation from me on my years working in the documentary realm and sharing stories and lessons from my various travels over that time. Again, that's going to be just for me Saturday, July 13th, but the festival runs the 11th through the 14th, and I highly encourage anyone who's interested to check that out. I maintain that independent film festivals are the absolute best place to see exciting new cinema and to find inspiration, to discover new talent, to unearth filmmakers that you never are going to be exposed to anywhere else. Even if it's not Snake Alley, even if you can't make it to Iowa in July, check your local newspapers and online boards for film festivals that are happening in your area. I've been lucky enough to be a judge and presenter and all kinds of things in a number of different festivals around the country, and it's always a true thrill to sit there and watch unfiltered cinema from independent voices who are driven solely by their drive to create, to tell stories. There's not layers of producers who are involved trying to muddy the waters around the vision. It is the essence of pure cinema, and really the only place that you can see this is at independent film festivals. So please, wherever you live, look for your local film festival and check it out, even if it's just for a day. You're going to see things that blow you away. You're going to be inspired, and it will reinvigorate your belief that cinema and the future of movies is in good hands. This is seeing that stuff, getting exposed to those kinds of artists at the ground level before they become anything. And it is absolutely incredible. In publishing news, the latest issue of Remind magazine is hitting newsstands and mailboxes now. In that magazine, I have a monthly column called Roadside Memories, where I spotlight some kind of roadside attraction or shuttered amusement park from years gone by. I featured everything from wax museums to the Xanadu houses, on to Fort Dells in Wisconsin Dells, Wisconsin, which is super close to my heart. Every month, it's a new adventure. And in this issue, that spotlights the top 100 sci-fi movies of all time, I have a wonderful double-length feature on Forrest J. Ackerman's Ackermansion in Los Angeles. This is a story that I've wanted to tell for a long time, and for it, I brought in lots of different voices from the world of special effects, from people who were friends with Forey, to journalists, to share their memories of this very special place. When I pitched the Remind team on my idea for a double-length piece on the Ackermansion, I had no clue that it was headed for the sci-fi issue, and I had no clue that it was going to be a double issue. So they were totally open to it, which I'm very, very grateful for, and I'm so proud of that column. So again, this is Remind Magazine, the July-August issue. That's at remindmagazine.com and on newsstands very, very soon. Take a look at it, and I hope you enjoy. After the conversation with Todd, we'll have voicemails. You can always leave a message at 951-357-6955, and I'll play that on the air and be happy to respond to you, whatever question or comment you might have. I'm introducing themes with this episode, and the question I posed to everyone with this was, what movie do you like to turn people on to? What's a film that you take great joy in introducing people to? Have some wonderful responses in there. So check that out after the conversation with Todd Sokolove. So without going on any further here, one question to address that I've received a number of emails or messages on social media about. Yes, that is me drumming at the beginning and the end of the show. I'm a huge fan of guys like Buddy Rich and Gene Krupa and Chick Webb and so many of the other drum icons who were masters with brushes, and I wanted to try my hand at doing something fun with that for the show. So that is me at the top and bottom there. Thank you to those who have reached out and asked. I appreciate that. Without further ado, here is the conversation with Todd Sokolove from Paramount. I hope you enjoy. I will talk to you on the other side. Todd, thank you so much for joining me here today. This is going to be so much fun.
Yeah, definitely. Glad to be here.
I'd like to turn back the clock a little bit to when you were a kid. When we're
So would I.
young, when we're young,
Who
we're
wouldn't want to
open.
do that?
Right. When we're young, we're kind of open to everything, and
Yeah.
that's our ultimate discovery window. It's like
Mhm.
exploration is everything to us. Tell me about
Yeah.
your earliest memories of falling in love with either a TV show or a movie, something on the
Yeah.
screen.
Well, I do have the benefit of my parents being very, oddly enough, they did not have any 16 millimeter or 8 millimeter cameras or anything, to record me with, but they
Mm.
did a lot of audio tapes. And so I actually have like audio tapes of myself as a toddler talking about my first movie. So I know for a fact that the first movie I saw was For the Love of Benji
Oh,
in the theater. And I don't remember that though. I don't have a memory of it. I just have the memory of I actually have the memory of recording that audio. But
mm.
my actual like visual memory of a movie was Pinocchio broadcast on television. I was born in Michigan. I grew up in Colorado and Denver. And I remember sitting in the living room watching Pinocchio on that TV and just being completely fascinated.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
but yeah, that's easily my earliest memory. And then of course my parents were always taking me to the movies, yeah, all the time. So I do have like memories here and there throughout those years, I guess.
I
Yeah.
have to hear about these tapes, though. Tell me about what you
The
used to
tapes are
record.
interesting. Yeah, well, they would send these audio tapes almost instead of writing letters to their parents. They would send audio like recordings and just put them in the mail. And so I have all these tapes that they recorded over the years. And of course, mostly my mom or my dad talking to their parents. And I make a lot of appearances in which I sing John Denver songs and and some Carpenter songs, and I mean it's just true like baby in the 70s kind of experience. It's very funny.
That is amazing.
Yeah,
That's that
yeah,
that slice of our life usually is little slivers of memory. It's
yeah.
big events or big trips or something like that, but
Well,
you have this chronology there preserved.
I do, and it's cool, but I don't have video. And for me, that drives me crazy because I love visuals so much, throughout my whole life. I have these memories of it, but I don't have videotapes like a lot of the current generation has. So,
Yeah.
but to have that is enough. I do know of friends that I grew up with that occasionally will surprise me with an old home movie, and I'm in it,
Yeah.
and that's always magic. You wish
Were
you could
you
go back and see yourself at that point, and that's as close as you can ever get, really.
were you guys making movies or what like when your friend sends you
Yes.
something and says check this out. Tell me about the movies you were making and who your
I
friends what you
did.
guys
I
were
made
doing.
Yeah, so my bar mitzvah gift was a video camera. I bought a video camera with the money, like some of the money that was, saved up from babysitting and mowing lawns and stuff, and also the bar mitzvah was like kind of the that was the gift, right? And so
Mhm.
I just went crazy, and that was 1985. So. It was actually a camcorder that you put on your shoulder. It didn't have the separate VCR pack that you also had to carry, which was
Mhm.
probably just on the cusp of that and it was VHS. The thing was super heavy. The batteries weighed more than the actual camera.
Oh
And
yeah.
it was magic because it was I think it was even called the Magnavox Movie Maker. It was this like incredible compact thing, but it was one of the first like compact ones. And then of course there was the JVC one that was in Back to the Future, which of course immediately I wanted that one instead.
Oh
So
yeah.
back in the day, definitely had that. I did want to shoot on film though, and I would stockpile 8 millimeter, like Kodak 8 millimeter, in preparation for my film camera. But I never went that way. Even by the time I got to
Oh
school, I never
man.
really dove into the film format.
We
Always
I used
video.
to we used to rent those cameras from there's a grocery store
Yeah,
here in town and we'd be able
yeah,
to rent the camera and then we go to Farmore was our chain where I rented just stacks of tapes all the time. We rented everywhere, but Farmore had a really good deal on a bundle of VHS tapes. And then we would
yeah.
just run around the neighborhood shooting stuff. We'd borrow a clown suit from a friend or rent a gorilla suit for a day or whatever
That's
and
awesome.
just shoot all this crazy stuff. What were you making? What were you guys shooting? Were you
Yeah,
writing it?
totally. On the fly, I was editing it in the camera and writing it on the fly. I'm like, it was always, as you can imagine, it was like right out of Super 8. It was like the movie.
Yeah.
It was like just genre films. A lot. I was probably obsessed around that time with Ed Wood,
Mm,
believe it or not.
yeah.
There was the Spielberg and the Lucas and all that crazy stuff that we grew up with blockbuster films. But I was in particularly fascinated with the 50s and 60s and just all of the. I think really the reason why is because they were the ones that you could get on VHS really cheaply.
Right.
At the
Yeah.
supermarket, like Good Times Home
Yeah.
Video. So like Night
Oh
of the
yeah.
Living Dead and a couple Ed Wood films I remember, and like the Godzilla versus probably the 70s one. What was it?
Megalon?
Megalon. Thank you. Yeah, with Jet Jaguar. So all of that kind of stuff was just like so influential to me because I could watch them over and over again.
Yeah.
Like you could buy them at the grocery store for like $8. Killers from Space with Peter
Yeah.
Graves. That's another great one. And I'm
Yeah.
just completely fascinated with that. at that time. But going back before that, I didn't get into horror movies probably until I would say like 83, 84. Definitely around Terror in the Isles. That sealed the
Hmm.
deal for me. My dad took me to it, and I was just like, I need to see every single one of these movies, right?
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
was a gateway, and I totally went crazy at the video store and rented just about everything I could get my hands on. And that,
You are you're blowing my mind right now because
oh, okay.
not only like Ed Wood was huge for me when I was little too. I remember getting
Yeah.
Rudolph Gray's book called in Ecstasy or Nightmare of
Yeah.
Ecstasy.
Great book. Yep.
And I still have that original copy sitting on my
Mm,
shelf. But what really attracted me to it is it was the first time that any of this seemed accessible in any way. And I loved the
yeah.
fact that this was a filmmaker who wasn't getting overly concerned with a lot of the more technical elements that the filmmakers that are being celebrated were. He was like, let's set up
Yeah.
and shoot somewhere and let's go. And
Yes.
so he was huge for me. And then I thought that Tim Burton's movie Ed Wood later on was just such a perfect
Yeah.
love letter to film and
Right.
to
Probably one of the best ones, right? Like just in terms
yeah,
of really capturing, but both the style of it and the celebration.
yeah,
And I probably saw in the Ed Wood thing that he was coding a lot in the films as well. And there were
right.
reoccurring character, reoccurring actors, but reoccurring kind of themes, no matter what. And
Hmm.
that was fascinating to me. Yeah, I mean, it could have been, look, I could have fallen in love with like John Cassavetes films or something, gotten a little bit more highbrow kind of
Yeah,
experience, but there was really something about Ed Wood. And then, of course, when Tim Burton announced that he was doing this Ed Wood movie, it blew my mind because I thought I was the only person on the planet that had discovered these
yeah.
movies. Like nobody talked about these movies. Now, of course, everyone knows it's part of the lexicon that Plan 9 from Outer Space is the worst movie ever made. But like back then, it was just like it felt very special. Yeah,
Yeah. And you and I know
yeah,
it's not the worst movie ever made. It is so
that is
far from the
correct.
worst movie ever
It
made, I
is
would say.
definitely not. I would say there are a lot of movies today that are always, beating each other out for the worst movie
Oh
ever
my
made. But
gosh.
yeah, it's
Yeah, for sure. And then
all relative.
Godzilla versus Megalon is the second
Megalon.
tier of blowing my mind here because that was the first
Okay.
Godzilla movie I ever saw. And it was
Yep.
the
Probably
same
mine too.
situation where I got the tape, which I still
Yeah.
have. And I love
Oh,
Jet
nice.
Jaguar, and he has his own
Uh,
theme. I mean, everything about that movie, the
yes.
weird dolphin pontoon. My
Yeah,
brother
yeah,
and I,
yeah.
my brother and I can quote that film top to bottom.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I watched it a lot, and I had a Japanese exchange student in high school,
Oh,
and she would tell me all of the like, well, that actor was very well known when he was younger, and they put
hmm.
him in this movie and blah, blah. Like, so I like got that insight, but she would also tell me like that's not actually what they're saying in the Japanese version of the movie. And, like,
I can
so
only
that was like
imagine.
it was really fun, yeah, to learn all that, and of course you learn all that later on, and now it's in the Criterion collection, but
Yeah,
yeah,
who would have ever thought that, right?
it's one of those things for
Yeah,
the completists out there.
yeah.
But yeah, just so much fun with those, and we had the mom and pop. I mean, you're in the Midwest is
Hmm.
was a great place for mom and pop video stores, and
Oh
so
yeah,
we had the Video Hut in Ypsilanti, Michigan, which was absolutely amazing. They had the swinging doors to the adult section in the back, but
right.
they were, it was one of those places, but it was great because they were like, they just had everything. It was
Mm.
back in the day when like it didn't matter; they get a copy of it, and
Oh yeah,
so you did get a lot of. I had no concept of whether or not something was a big blockbuster years ago, or if it was a complete flop. And I think in those early days of watching movies on video, that really helped. That agnostic approach to watching the movies, like really,
yeah,
really helps you develop a love on your own of things, as opposed to, of course, today where everything is like, oh, this is trending, and you open up your Netflix and like, I want to watch what everybody's talking about and things like that. There really was something fresh about like
yeah,
stumbling upon Zone Troopers, like on
yeah,
VHS and being like,
yeah,
where
yeah.
did this come from? And then, like that was a magic time for certainly genre films. Yeah.
You and I, we've shot some stuff with Leonard Maltin. Do you remember his books that he
Mm,
used to have? They were
yes.
printed on like Bible paper. Do you remember those?
They were printed on Bible paper. That's a good point. That was like the cheapest paper, so they could fit everything. I
Yeah.
loved Leonard Maltin growing up, and the reason I did was because he was the only critic, or at least in terms of that book,
Hmm.
that was writing paragraph reviews, like little summary reviews that we all now put on Letterboxd. Like he was the first one
Yeah.
to really do that, and I thought it was a interesting way to digest. Like you would flip through the book and just randomly, pick a page, and then you read the log line and or the review. And I thought it was just a fascinating Bible. It was a Bible, right, for us
Yeah. Yeah.
to look up the film. And sometimes the film wasn't there because he may not have seen it. I
Hmm.
remember getting the new edition of it every year
Hmm.
and being extremely excited that 1984's movies were in, like, in the 1986 version or whatever. I
Yeah.
remember opening it up to see what he thought of my favorite movie at the time, and probably my, you know, favorite movie of all time still, Gremlins. He
Mm.
did not like Gremlins. And then he spoofed it in Gremlins 2. He appears in
Yeah.
Gremlins 2 and the Gremlins attack him. And nobody appreciated that joke more than me because I remember just being so disappointed that Leonard Maltin didn't like Gremlins. Like that's
Oh
you
man.
wanted to connect with Leonard Maltin back in the day. But
My
now,
my
like, it's
dad had that
funny, like,
book.
yeah.
He had it in the pocket of his lazy, like his recliner chair, and I would be laying around on a Sunday or whatever and flip to a page.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I actually still have that too, the original book. And what I learned, and this goes back to the Ed Wood thing as well, and the
mm,
lack of sort of a hierarchy and quality awareness that you mentioned a minute ago, is that
yeah,
Leonard had everything on a 5 star to turkey. That was
right.
his line. And I learned
Yeah.
very quickly that if it had a turkey there, I would probably like it. I learned
Oh,
to kind
yeah,
of
right.
I learned to embrace the stuff that he just thought was the trash. And that was eye-opening for me before Fangoria,
Yeah.
before all these other magazines that just kind of put everything out there on an even playing field. His turkeys were
Yes.
the first universal bat signal for me to know that I was likely to want to dive
So,
in on whatever he was referencing.
yes, absolutely. And also, I don't know if you had the same experience, but there was the Golden Turkey Awards that
Yeah,
the brothers did. Gosh, I'm totally drawing a blank on their names.
I am as well.
Jeffrey, something, Method, right? Michael Method. And they would
Michael,
say
yeah.
wrote, yeah, and they had the Golden Turkey Awards, which was like predated the Razzies, and I remember thinking I need to see all those movies because
Yeah.
they were so mean to them, and I did. I went; those were the movies I wanted to see for
Yeah.
definitely, for sure. Leonard, I always respect. I still respect,
Hmm.
and I really couldn't put my finger on what it was about Siskel and Ebert that I didn't like, but I loved how Siskel and Ebert were so completist on a weekly basis. You could tune
Hmm.
into the show. It was nice to grow up near where the show, was syndicated from in Chicago, and so like it was
Yeah.
always on Detroit television, and so like
Yeah.
that whole like exposure to critics and never really like it didn't make me form my own opinion. It's funny that you say that, like that. If anything, it sparked your interest in the turkeys for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
The ones
Yeah.
that, especially because they hated horror movies, there was always that. And I'm just like, all right, well, now I got to see this.
Yeah,
You know?
totally. Yeah, the forbidden
Yeah,
fruit, right?
yeah,
The scorned
totally.
child. Tell me about the elements. Tell me about the elements in Ed Wood's films that you were seeing. You mentioned some recurring elements that were resonant with you. Tell me about them.
Well, I think it was just for more than anything, it was the fact that he had the confidence he was actually making a masterpiece. That it
Hmm.
was he took everything so seriously, and
Yeah.
there are literally characters that bump into props or run into walls and things, and the camera just keeps filming. And I noticed those things like before even reading the books and before it was made fun of in Tim Burton's film, or there was a great Paramount film actually called It Came from Hollywood. I don't know if you ever saw this.
I haven't.
It's It's not available in home ed because we can't clear the music for it. It will never happen.
Oh,
But it was a theatrical release, and it's the cast of, at the time, it was the cast of SCTV and Saturday Night Live. So you had
wow.
Gilda Radner, you had Dan Aykroyd, you even had Cheech and Chong show up, all filmed on the back lot of Paramount, doing these like interstitials about the old days of sci-fi and horror films. And so it was everything like 1940s to 1960s. And it had a literally had a whole section on Ed Wood.
Hmm.
And that sealed the deal for me because I had seen Planet from Outer Space and Glenn or Glenda, but they went into the detail of it, and I remember thinking like, okay, this is a real thing. Like this other people know about this, and like really getting into it. And even that
Yeah.
was kind of obscure because it was not like a big movie. It was always on cable and video. But yeah, as far as like the coded stuff, like I never really picked up on the whole sexuality thing with his movies, which
Hmm.
ironically, like, but you knew it was there, right? Like you knew that there was something there. And in the same way though that like you never really knew what his genre was that he was going for. I think I always loved that. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like even the juvenile delinquent movies are a little but like it's fantastic, they take place in a
Like
totally different
Jailbait
world.
and the rest. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, the
Yeah.
violent
Yep.
years, I love that.
Yep.
Yeah, oh, Sinister Urge is a good one.
Yeah.
So yeah, all that
I think
stuff
it was
was
Rhino
was
who first started taking him seriously
it's
because
exactly right. That's how I
stuff
rented
on,
them was the Rhino video. Yeah,
yeah, and that was
totally.
such a great education for sure. So
I
you're
don't think
fat.
I would have seen them if it wasn't for growing up next to Ann Arbor, Michigan. I mean, I am from Ypsilanti, but like Ann Arbor was always has it still is like this cultural progressive town,
Yeah.
mainly because of the university there. But there were so many oddballs. In a way, it was like the original Austin. Maybe I don't
Mm,
know which weirdness came first. So I got to
yeah.
see all that stuff because it was in the video stores. It was playing at the repertory theater, all that kind of stuff.
For me, it was Iowa City, where the University of Iowa is,
Yeah.
which is about half an hour away from where I grew up. And
Oh, nice.
it was totally my New York City. It had great music venues, a bunch of
Yeah.
record stores. It had
Yep.
awesome
That's key.
rentertainment, and the Tofu Hut were the two indie rental places for videos. And
The tofu. I had the video hut. You had the tofu
I did, yeah. And there was even this goth shop that had like what was that magazine? It had all like hair dye and stuff like that, but also it
hmm
had incense and all these goth magazines, and it was just so
So great.
fascinating.
It
All the
was
culture that my hometown lacked.
that's so great. And it's funny when I moved to New York City after, like in college, it felt like a very natural transition because like what you're describing is basically St. Mark's Place in the East Village. Like that's where Manic Panic started in terms of high,
Right.
hair dye, and there was the incense shop, and there was the punk shop, and the goth shop, and like, and then of course there were the cinemas down there and music venues, and so like to be exposed to that, I think at an early age, especially like getting into it in high school was probably the most transformative like
Yeah.
of what my taste was.
I see guitars behind you. Were you playing music back then too?
I actually not guitar. I took piano lessons for years and I was really bad about practicing. And
We all
so
were.
well, as nobody likes to practice, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't really care for classical. So I learned by ear and I still play by ear
Hmm.
and like love to play alongside music and try to figure out, chord arrangements and things like that. But I'm in no way I'm a musician. So before you ask what bands I was in,
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
always
yeah.
been
No, I hear you. I
more,
hear you.
yeah, I was the guy taping the bands. I filmed a lot of bands in college and,
Oh, really?
yeah, absolutely. Love that.
Any notables?
No, unfortunately, they all probably broke up right after college.
Yeah.
But there were some hopefuls on the
Yeah.
Michigan rock scene.
Sure. Yeah. Well,
back in the day.
Detroit's kind of, that's a big rock and roll city. Alice Cooper, and
Yeah,
there's a lot of
it was
people who look
actually,
back there.
oh, absolutely. Well, Iggy Pop's from Ypsilanti, you know,
Hmm.
he was born there. But yeah, yeah, no, there was actually an industrial band that I did all their filming in college that came out of that scene, which the techno industrial scene was very big in
Yeah.
the 90s in Detroit. So, yeah,
Amazing. What were they called?
good times. HAL, like the computer.
Oh, what a great name. And
Yeah,
cinema related too. How
and
perfect for you,
cinema
right?
related. There you go. Yeah,
Yeah. I
I
remember
used to
what.
love. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, you go.
No, I was gonna say, well, one of their shows they did this. You would appreciate this. They always had 16 millimeter projectors just going randomly, like thrown on different things in the audience and on the background. And one of them for their set was always the Thai strangulation scene from Hitchcock's Frenzy. And it was
Oh,
just playing in the
on
background
loop.
off of some, like
Like,
on a loop, like some 8 millimeter loop kind of thing. And it was just that and like, scratched out little celluloid, where you take
oh yeah,
the leader and scratch it, and that was going all over the place. It was a fun time,
that's really
very
cool.
artistic. Yeah,
I love
yeah,
that when music and cinema are blended. I remember going to see, I
yeah.
used to go to Minneapolis quite a bit to see different bands play. And one of my all time favorite bands is called Babes in Toyland. And I remember
Oh
going
yeah,
to
okay.
see Babes play at First Avenue there. And prior to the show, they had the entirety of the original Rollerball playing on all these like several screens in the room. And I
Nice.
always wonder, thinking like, I wonder if anybody knows what this thing is, or if they just think
What
it's
it
some kind of
is?
crazy cult movie of some sort. But it
Yeah,
was such a great, somehow perfect marriage of that kind of
yeah,
weirdo rollerball future vision right into
totally.
what I thought was like the most edgy, amazing music for an incredible night right
I
after. That
love
was
that.
so cool.
I mean, the most distracting thing for us when you're in a bar or at a concert is if a movie is playing in the
Yeah.
background because you just want to be watching it. You just
Oh
like,
yeah.
yeah, even if you've
It's
seen it a million times.
for sure. For that, yeah, for me, it's movies or kids. If there's kid or dogs, if there's
Yeah,
babies or kids or dogs, I'm going to gravitate toward them and then have to be pulled
just
back to the
gravitate.
party. Same thing with the TV when it's on. Tell me,
That's
so
awesome.
how did you
Yeah.
end up? You mentioned going to New York. How did you end
Mm.
up interning at Miramax? How did that come about? And what were your goals at that point with where you wanted to be in
Yeah.
life?
Well, like every film student, I was figuring it out and trying to see what I wanted to do. I had hosted a few shows in college. One was a film review show called Fade to Black, and the other was a game show, which you can imagine. So I loved hosting. I loved being on camera talent, and I was getting really caught up in that. But at the same time, I also liked editing a lot.
Mm,
And I knew those were two areas I wanted to pursue. I knew I didn't like production. I knew I liked post production. Oddly enough, I figured that out like very early in the
sure.
process.
Yeah.
Production is, if you when you're around it, you figure that out. Like
Hmm.
it either grabs you or it doesn't, and it didn't for me. And I learned that very early in my career. So I was kind of fascinated with the business side of film, and then later the marketing side of film. But I got the internship at Miramax when I was at a point in my life where I was obsessed with animation.
Mm,
And this is pre Toy Story, so this is pre CGI. It was still hand drawn cell
hmm.
animation, and it was very soon after the success of The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast. And I just had it set in my mind I was going to be an animator. So I went to animation school at Tisch at NYU, and I ended up there one side, like I guess it was the summer of '92. I ended up not getting into one of the classes. And it was like, I want to say like 2 weeks before my plans to head over there. And I had like paid for the dorm for the
Mm,
summer. Like I knew where I was staying and all that, but I didn't have the core class that I thought I was getting into. It filled up basically. And so somebody suggested, oh, well, why don't you try to get an internship? And now internships generally you have to get them like months in advance, right?
yeah.
Sometimes
Oh
a year
yeah.
in advance and you have to go through this whole process and everything. So I ended up, I was a projectionist at the time. And I remember like in the projection booth, like between changing reels, like calling nonstop this professor at NYU that was the mentor for the internship program. And he was so confused. He was like, I don't understand. You're in Michigan. You're looking for an internship now. What are you doing? He, it was my first New Yorker that I had to deal with. And he
Oh,
said to
yeah.
me, I'll never forget this. He said, we have this thing here at NYU called the Goya program. And I said, like, like the Spanish Goya, like the painter. And he says, get off your ass. What? It was so mean and rude to me. And I was
Wow.
just like, okay. I said, well, listen, I'm going to be there in a couple weeks. Like, I'm still coming. Can I meet you in the office and like we can figure out if there are any internships that maybe become available? Yeah. He says, yeah, sure, fine, whatever. So I go there and he gives me this book. And it's like all the production companies that are in New York City, all the film production companies and the contacts at the time, right? And you know, because it was through Tish, and it was probably the 411 guide or whatever they used to have, like back in the
Hmm.
day, TV and film yellow book, you know, stuff like that. And I go
Yeah.
through it and I write down all these numbers on a piece of paper, and I call Sony and I call Warner Brothers and I call like everybody under the sun. Miramax, they go, oh yes, when can you come in to meet us, right? Like, okay. So, the only one, right? Like literally, I get there on a Sunday. On the Tuesday, I go into Miramax in Tribeca on Greenwich Street, and I meet with this woman who says, "Well, you're responding to the thing that we put on the bulletin board, right at Tish." And I'm like, "Yeah,
Yeah, of
yes, I
course.
am." Like I
Yep.
don't know. It just
That's the
was like
one.
total. That's the one. I'm the guy. That total happenstance. Next thing I know, I'm in Harvey's office as his intern for the summer, like last minute replacement. And then I find out that it was for his assistants. His assistants, at the time he had four, had hired under the table, like got an intern in to do a lot of the grunt work because they were just so overworked, right? So I was that
Yeah.
guy, and it was mind blowing. I had access to. I remember the movie Swimming with Sharks, you
Yeah.
know, with Wiley. Yeah, so that's what it was basically. Except
Right
nobody
in.
got tied up and hurt and killed, and no
Right.
spoilers. But yeah, but it really was that. I was just like right into the fire. Um, and yeah, and the rest was a blur. But it definitely like what it did was it exposed me to the business side of film. Basically, got in there and learned about the distribution side of the business and had a distinctive role at Miramax and some incredible stories to tell. So that's how I got there. And it's funny, you know, they always say, you know, it's all like timing and who you know and coincidence and stuff like that. And it's a great example of that, basically.
JustinBeam.com is your home for Reverend entertainment news and merchandise. Now available is an exclusive line of Reverend wearables, including t-shirts, hoodies, hats, and more. Show your love for physical media with clothing from JustinBeam.com.
And that's right when Miramax was on I mean, really just ramping everything up. I mean, this is the golden age where Tarantino and pre-Scream and
Oh yeah,
everything.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So this was pre Disney Miramax, and it was pre Quentin Tarantino Miramax. They had just acquired Reservoir Dogs from the circuit of, you know, the festival circuit rather.
Wow.
I had to explain to people they were the studio that released Scandal, if you remember that movie.
Yeah.
It was a mild hit, and Madonna, Truth or
Yep.
Dare, and Sex Lies and Videotape, and like so they were still very indie and trying to get into more of a mainstream thing.
Hmm.
Bob Weinstein was setting up Dimension.
Yep.
So there were all sorts of like Clive Barker books on his desk and, you know, like all this stuff that they were getting into.
Oh my
So it
gosh.
was an exciting time to be there. And I didn't have a clue as to how that side of the business operated and the logistics of it.
Yeah.
And ironically, did not get into marketing from that necessarily. Marketing came a little bit later.
Yeah.
But I did get my foot in the door. And it led to some opportunities, so that was good.
You worked at Disney?
Oh, and then I never became an animator, by the way. So there's that.
Oh,
I
well,
did,
yeah,
I
here we
did
are.
actually like. I mean, I kind of like fell in love with other things, and I'm kind of glad I didn't become an animator because it was a terrible time to become one. All the studios started building up their animation departments and forming animation departments. They had, Warner Brothers doing these like Quest for Camelot
Yeah.
and Thumbelina and stuff like that. And Fox did Titan AE and Anastasia, and like they were not around very soon after that. So I always think like, gosh, that would have crushed me, like to
Yeah.
study something, get into it, and everything. So I'm very happy with like the way my particular path went, and I still adore animation and love to have been involved in learning about it and building a reel and stuff like that, but it just was not the path traveled, in other words.
Yeah, well, I mean, think about all if you add up all the elements that were part of your background from even recording when you were young to the home video stuff into the love for music and filming music into animation, it's all there. So of course you're at Paramount now where it's all of that under one banner. That makes total sense.
Oh, yeah, it's bizarre to be there. We've had this conversation before, and I'm sure you've pinched yourself many times working
Oh,
on the
every
projects
day.
that we've done together. Like, it's very surreal, and I'm very appreciative of it.
Yeah.
And I have the job now that I thought I was going to have when I graduated from college, just coming off of that internship and the experience that I had early in the career. But like, takes a while to get there sometimes, you know?
And the job you did get, what was it, Disney?
Uh,
Disney World?
right out. Oh, I did work at Disney World. Yeah, I did. So I was in the college program, which is a internship basically. While you're in college, you work at Disney World and you take management courses at their accredited Disney University, like program, and you learn about their philosophy of management style and business, and then you get college credit for it. So you take a whole semester off and you get the credit. You live down there. It's the original MTV Real World. I mean, they are missing out on filming a season there because it was nuts, like crazy. It's just a bunch of like crazy young 20-year-olds like getting into trouble every night. Like we used to say there was Walt Disney's 101 terminations. It was like all the different ways you could get fired from the Walt Disney Company.
Oh my gosh.
And it was, yeah, so that was formative for sure. I did want to, continue working for Disney. And then the irony was like after I did that internship at Disney World was the acquisition of Miramax by Disney. And I was just like, oh, it's all coming together, like, and then I never went back to Miramax. I ended up moving to New York City, becoming an editor for a number of small projects. The movie that moved me to New York City was a Castle Rock film called Striptease with
Oh,
Demi Moore.
oh yeah. Legendary.
Legendary. I was literally reading the book by Carl Hyacin on the plane on my way to the interview in New York and everything. And I never left. I was there for 23 years. I moved out there for that job, and then yeah, and I've worked with studios ever since. So it's one
That's
of
so
those things
crazy.
I have no idea how I had the confidence or like the guts to do it because it was scary. I'm moving from the Midwest and like I'd never been anywhere, and I don't know, that summer
Yeah.
in New York must have like just totally baptism by fire by Harvey Weinstein, like, and just threw me into it. And I was like, all right, this is exciting. This is what I want to do.
Well, I think that
So,
I talk
yeah.
about this all the time with filmmakers because I'm really fascinated, especially with early films. It's similar with in
Mm,
music where that first film lands or the first album is really the
mm,
years. It's a culmination of years of raw energy and
yeah.
drive, but also lack of filters. It's like we don't know what
Mm,
not to do, and so we just
yeah.
boldly step into things. And then we learn by fire, like what you're saying. And that can be in a lot of
That's
cases,
interesting.
the greatest lessons, right?
Yeah. Well, I love music equally. I as film. And it's funny you say that because like when you do go back to your favorite band's first album, at the end of the day, it's the best album. You know,
Yeah.
like
Oh, yeah.
because it's the purest album. It's the purest thing of what the band stood to be, basically.
Right.
And
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, they change their sound with subsequent, work that they do. So that's
Right, because
definitely
more
true.
people surrounding them and they're hearing press and they're getting feedback from a million places where originally it's just the four of them or whatever. And there's something really raw.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it's the same with careers though, don't you think? That when you walk in the door somewhere, it's not even necessarily bravery that leads you there. It's just genuine interest and investment. And that purity
Hmm.
can sometimes present you in a way that
Yeah,
you wouldn't be aware of, but the person on the other side of that desk sees that, hears that, and goes, "My God, this energy is so different than someone who has like 20
totally.
years of experience."
I see it with my Yes, absolutely. I see it with my younger coworkers. I had a coordinator that just moved on to a great opportunity in a different industry, and she was crushed to leave, but it was a good opportunity. Um, and I told her, I said, like this, one of the things when she was leaving was that like all these people at Paramount in the office were very good friends to her. And I told her, I said, these are going to be your friends for most of your life, I think, because that was my experience. It's a lot of people's experience. Those formative years of something are very emotional, and I can totally remember going, back in the day, like first moving to New York City and trying to figure out what I was doing and question. I mean, I still question what I do. Like everybody does. This is not nothing is ideal in life, and you're always growing. But like that period of time was so specific to forming you, who you're going to be, and what you want to do, and
What do
everything.
you think
So.
you learned most, like when you look back at it and you consider lessons that you took from that time? What do you think was, if you could put one at the top of that list, what was the lesson that gave you the most from that experience?
Hmm. Um, God, that's a deep question, right? Like, I would say, I would say the biggest thing that I've learned from that period, and it's something you keep learning, is how much those years will come back, will be helpful to you currently and in the future.
Hmm.
So when I was an editor, I learned obviously like the skills of editing. It was kind of in the early days of nonlinear editing, like Avid was new. We were still doing,
Right.
we were still switching out the floppy disks with the EDLs and switching out the tapes and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I learned about the politics of an office space from the executive suite down to the uh, tape room operator. Right. I learned how to basically like form my personality and my like what who I was going to be in that whole world and know when to say what and be a part of it. That stuff was so much more interesting and formative than anything that you could learn in
Right.
school, basically.
Yeah.
So there's definitely that, like just always being like never like I never discount all of the stuff that I learned in my earlier years. Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. Were your parents supportive of your effort to get into entertainment and into film?
Yeah, they were. They had no idea how to get me into it. I think, even in high school, they knew, while I was in the backyard blowing stuff up for VHS
Yeah.
movie, short movies. Um, they were dumbfounded, right? I mean, my dad hysterically even invited a army recruiter over with the idea that I was going to join, like I was going to do propaganda films for the army because that's, you go to the army to learn film. True story. But so like every avenue was kind of like, they had just no idea. But when I did finally like get a few breaks, um, they were always
Hmm.
supportive, and they're supportive from like even just the point of like just taking me to the movies, and embracing it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So I knock on wood that was a good thing to have for sure.
Yeah.
And
So,
then
I
I
mean,
had family. I my my aunt was into experimental film and introduced me to, a lot more. Like she would send me these books about the factory and like about um, the anthology film archive scene on the Lower East Side and all of that stuff that was being done. And I had that blew my mind. I had to see all of that stuff as well, like the Kenneth Anger films, and really start to be, it definitely didn't turn me off from it. It just made me more like, okay, I got to get into whatever it is. Either I'm going to be like, making the movies or selling the movies or critiquing the movies. I want to be in this business.
Yeah, yeah. And,
And then,
and the New
yeah.
York scene is so different than LA. The film scene up there.
Oh, so different. Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, I guess it could have gone either way. Like I definitely, I knew that I wanted to go to undergrad in Michigan. I wanted to stay
Mhm.
local, and I fell in love with my college, which was Central Michigan University, because I was able to like produce shows my
Mm.
freshman year. There was this access to their studio, both the radio station and the television station that was just unparalleled. And I would not get that in NYU or UCLA or anything like that. So I was
Right.
very set on staying in Michigan and then supplementing my credits and it turned out to be NYU. So I had more of an East Coast swing for sure, which I'm very glad because it was also around the time of like Spike Lee and the indie film scene, growing really big in on the East Coast, Hal Hartley and stuff like that. And so like I was, I think a little bit more into that than the Hollywood scene for
Yeah.
sure.
Oh, I get it. Especially
Yeah,
considering your roots. It's
yeah,
so much more appealing. It's so much more raw. There's
yeah,
a raw energy to New York filmmaking, just like with a lot of music there too.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it
So
was a good thing to be exposed to for sure.
there's a long history of all these different gigs and stuff. When Let me first
Mm.
ask, when did you land at Paramount? Tell me about getting the gig at Paramount.
I came here to LA 6 years ago. We moved out here for a job opportunity that my husband had. We were toying with the idea of moving out here a few times. I actually had the offer to move to Los Angeles three times in my career while I was in New York City,
Wow.
all with the companies that I was with. And so the first time was with Warner Brothers, was with a major studio, and I turned it down, and I don't regret it at all, but it was just one of those things that like it just kept happening, and then I was actually consulting for a couple studios. There was a startup streaming service that I was doing acquisitions for, like really like oddball type things. And I was writing. I was writing for Screen Rant and like any, like
Mhm.
websites that would take me and send me to South by and things like that. Just so I was still doing stuff.
Yeah.
And so the opportunity came up to move out here, uh, and I just started looking, and this opportunity at Paramount was what came up. And it's funny because I've always been in the television industry, and it's closely related to film, but very different. Like it's exhausting. It's like reading episodic scripts and the marketing side of television of episodic on the production side is very fast paced and it can be very rewarding, but it was quite a job. And so like to be able to switch over to the film world and especially the catalog side was a dream come true. So like of course I did everything to get this to get it and landed it. So but that was how I came into it, basically.
Do you remember? I mean,
I
I
think if you
probably,
know that you're like, yeah, like that it's a pure case of like just being really, really driven of knowing what you want to do, you know? I wanted to still be in the studio system. It's a little hokey and old fashioned and everything, but I still have great respect for the studios. And I also love brand marketing. I truly believe that there needs to be a cohesive, like, kind of policing around brands. And whether that's like launching brands or the brand of each individual film, because each film has its own brand in a way,
mhm.
that fascinates me. And it puts our knowledge to use, like we get to geek out about certain things and form the future of those productions. And so this was just kind of like a dream come true type of situation. And so I took it. And it's been a
That's
wild ride. It's a
crazy.
great place to be. But you know, before taking this job, I always said like being a projectionist was the best job I ever had. It
Hmm.
just really was. It's kind of
Yeah.
the ideal job. If it paid more, I'd just do that. I just sit in a
Oh,
projection booth and all day.
did you? I'm I'm sure it wasn't a big because you'd been part of so much already. But do you remember the first day walking onto the Paramount lot? I mean, you want to talk about history, and I will never forget the first time that I had the opportunity with you guys. What was yours like?
I'll tell you the first time I had the opportunity to walk on a lot was actually Warner Brothers back in the day,
Mm,
you know, when I was there. And that blew my mind. And it was so incredible that every time that I went for work, I lied and said I hadn't been given a tour again, so that I could do the tour again. And and each tour got better, you know, like it depended on who was giving the tour and what access they had to certain things. And I will never
yeah.
forget this. There was one tour where it was like he was like head of PR for everything, for like worldwide PR and theatrical, and so he took me to the costume warehouse where they stored everything. And at the time, they just finished shooting the Avengers movie, not the Avengers, you know, as we know it, Marvel Avengers, but the
Yeah.
Ray Fine, you know, reboot kind of thing. And so they had all those like crazy costumes and the teddy bear costumes and everything, and it was just mind blowing. And I was just like, well, wait, you guys like just have all this stuff on the lot, like in storage? He says, yeah, we have the prop house too. And I'm like, you're kidding me. I'm like, do you have anything Gremlins related? So we go into the prop warehouse. He starts opening up cardboard boxes and he pulls out the giant gizmo head that they used for the close ups. And I'm like, I'm dying. I can now like
What?
go, like, I don't care what I do anymore. Like, I've completed my quest. It was amazing.
Yeah.
And that was just amazing. But like yes, all the glamour of being on the Paramount line is quite special, and uh, it's the oldest one in that's still there, right? Like everything else
Yeah.
is a condo now, basically.
Right.
Even the Warner, you know, the Warner Ranch here in Burbank, they just tore it down.
Hmm.
They're building it up, and that was, I mean, it's not as old as the studios, but that was where they shot all the Screen Gems television productions like Bewitched
Yeah.
and most recently in WandaVision, and like just such incredible backlot space. That's so sad, right? Like to see all that stuff torn down. You see
Right.
it on people's faces though, when they either visit the Paramount lot or they work there day to day. Everyone
Yeah.
always says that. It's you can just tell that it's just a magical place, right?
Yeah. And I like that the
A
studio
lot of
acknowledges it
ghosts.
with the plaque. Oh, a lot of ghosts. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of ghosts. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, I always like to say like probably most haunted by Rudolph Valentino because he lived
Hmm.
there. Like the first apartment building that he moved to is actually our HR
Oh,
building
wow.
now. And yeah, and then of course he shot, you know, many films for Paramount, including The Sheik, and then is buried right behind the lot in the Hollywood Forever Cemetery. And so that's got to have some energy going. But even just like I think about like just all the people that have passed through
Yeah.
there, you know, it's quite overwhelming. And half of the lot being the old RKO studios is actually even more
Hmm.
fascinating to me than the old Paramount lot because that's,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, it's where Citizen Kane was shot there. You know, like you can just
Yeah.
imagine all of the history. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. That's
pretty
just
cool.
incredible.
I
Yeah.
don't think everybody geeks out as much as we do about it, but like it is definitely geek worthy. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Legit. I agree. I agree. And you were
Yeah,
early on the cusp of podcasting too. You already talked about hosting and these other things that you
yeah.
did. Tell me about your early podcast efforts too.
Well, so I did a show called Beware of the Babylon with my friend Rachel Weisz, not the Oscar-winning Rachel Weisz, but a different Rachel. She was she was a comedian in New York City that had a blog called Beware of the Babylon. I had, or no, sorry, New York City Babylon. I had a website called Beware of the Blog, off of Beware of the Blob,
Hmm.
the sequel to the
Yep.
Blob, and anyway, so that's where that name came from. We did this really rinky-dink podcast, and we're very early. There were maybe like 20 podcasts out there, very very early in the process, and as a result, um, whenever there was a tech story about this emerging thing in entertainment club podcasting, like we would get called up, right? Because a lot of them were pretty nerdy, like a lot of the podcasts were actually about podcasting, but they weren't. It wasn't a thing. Right? It wasn't a thing. So we actually had a segment on the show. Let's talk about podcasting. Like we would make fun of all these things, and so it was a
Yeah.
little bit more interesting than going to those guys. And so we had like a Newsweek article, we had a Wall Street Journal article, and it was like absolutely hysterical to have this like little nichey thing for a while. And then of course, we did it for over 10 years and got a really great listenership. And then it becomes impossible to sustain something like that and not make
Right.
money. So like we stopped the show. We did pick up a couple awards though. We went to like the Webutante balls and things like that. Or we're in
Oh.
there with the head of Twitter at the time and the head of Facebook and all that. It was very,
Ooh.
very funny. Um, but yeah, and then, like I dived in and out of it. So I'm like thrilled that you invited me on your podcast because I still love the podcasting world. And these are the types of shows that I tend to listen to, infotainment and talk shows.
Yeah.
Because that was what that thing was, I guess. People would ask, "What is your show about?" And I'd say, "Well, it's sort of like a comedy talk show." I don't know. That was the big question. It's like Seinfeld. It was a show about nothing. It really was.
Yeah.
Honestly, we just,
And 10 years into it, you're still
kind of
going, I
make it
don't
up.
know.
I still have no idea what it was. Yeah, exactly. But we were huge in China. Like our ratings were so big overseas, it was ridiculous. We were totally convinced that like there there was this alternate universe where we had posters of ourselves on walls and things like that. I have no idea. But according
That's
to the numbers from Libsyn, we had a very big audience.
That's wild. Okay, so just to touch on a couple things at Paramount here, the
Yeah.
Paramount Presents series. Paramount
Mm.
historically, especially among genre fans, it's a bit of a complicated relationship, right? Because
Oh,
everyone,
sure.
so many horror fans just really treasure so many of the classic films. There's the Rosemary's Babies
Yeah.
on through the
Yeah.
Friday the 13th and everything. But the studio didn't really ever, well, I mean, I still have all my original Friday tapes, the SLP
Hmm.
versions you could buy at
Yeah.
Suncoast and all that stuff. But
Oh gosh. Right. Right.
when it came time for the DVDs, for it to move beyond the
Hmm.
video format,
The
Paramount
tapes. Yeah.
from tapes, yeah, they like
Yeah.
they had the wrong Jason on the covers. They had all this stuff. So there, and
Yes,
then
they did.
a lot of the archive was just sort of sitting there, like what? This is this
Yes.
vast resource of incredible history
Yeah.
just sitting there. I would love to hear about because
Yeah.
this was your baby, the Paramount Presents concept.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear how this thing
Yeah.
came about, how you sold the studio on it, who
Sure.
kind of had this complicated history, and about how you poured some of your favorites into the series.
Well, first of all, and when I came into Paramount, I was so naive, right? Like I was coming from, trust me, I was coming from the place of being a fan and being a
Yeah.
collector and knowing exactly what you're saying here, right? Like I had all of the tapes. I was in the Columbia Tape Club even. I had everything on all of the John Hughes films that we had, the big blockbusters like The Untouchables and Top Gun and things like that. So I knew where it started. I knew where it came from. The funny story I like to tell that like was the premonition of me being in this role is that when I was about, and I don't know if I've ever told you this, but I must have been like 7 or 8 years old. We had just moved to Detroit, to Michigan, and we were at like a home and boat show like they have, at like Cobo Arena or whatever in Detroit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there was a display of this new video disc technology, and they were showing Star Trek the Motion Picture on video disc.
Huh.
And I was just transfixed. I just, like a little kid, just standing there with my brother, who was 4 years younger, and I was supposed to be watching him. And we both got lost from my parents because of this, because like I'm just there standing. And it was one of those things where they had to page, can the parents of da,
Oh
da, da.
yeah.
So that was my first inkling of home entertainment, and just the concept that you could watch the movie again from your home. It was before even like discovering novelizations. It was like the only way to rediscover the film was that like you
Right.
had this player, and I longed for that. And of course, then it took like maybe 10 years before we had our first VCR, and so we actually didn't have cable growing up even. Like, I was starved to watch my favorite movies
I
over
didn't
and over
either.
again.
Yeah.
So yeah, so like fast forward to this role of Paramount, and I'm coming in, I have all these ideas, and I'm like, oh my God, we should be doing this, and we should be doing that, and doing this. And like I said about like you learn very early politics and where your place is in things and how to get things done. I had to tread lightly,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, One of the things that Paramount, unfortunately, in their history had done was a sublicense to Warner Brothers, and Warner took care of the majority of the Blu-ray period. They launched all the catalog titles and the DVDs and stuff like that. So because it wasn't under the control of the studio, they really you had the wrong Jason on covers, or you had just bad artwork in general, but you had really bad transfers. You had laserdisc transfers that were going onto Blu-ray, like things like that. Wrong
Yeah.
aspect ratios, you name it, right? And so I inherited that, and basically, I knew I wasn't going to right the wrongs of that. I had to learn about the economics of it, and this is only 6 years ago, so it's kind of at the decline of physical, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, in trying to figure all that out, was born Paramount Presents as an opportunity to bring out the remastered product that the archive team had been working on at the time on Blu-ray, because it was the viable solution. It was, Criterion was still doing Blu-ray. None of the sub-licensees were doing 4K. 4K is very expensive. It's still expensive to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
So once I figured that out, and we did kind of this bespoke packaging, bespoke product that was to compete with the Criterions and the Shout Factories and stuff like that, we started out of the gate. We got, hate mail, and not so much for the product itself, but it was just kind of like, why are they re-releasing this kind of thing? Like, it's just, they're just charging more for something else, and nobody was seeing the benefit. And if they did it 4K, why didn't they bring it out to 4K instead of Blu-ray, and da da da. And so out of all that came growth. Like, we learned how we had to change direction with the line. We had to start including more VAM. We had to have digital copies in it, and ideally it would be new to format. We more King Creoles. Like, King Creole was the third one, but it was the first one that was new to the format, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And now we're at a place where it's like 4K. Like, we can actually bring these titles to 4K. There's actually a model where it works, and people are buying them. So that's a good thing. But like, we're almost at 50 titles. I would never expected this thing to get that big, get that high in
Yeah.
volume. We are taking our time to get them right, as opposed to just saying like we need to release 2 titles a month, because I think that's a recipe for
Yeah.
failure. Definitely. And yeah, but thank you for asking, because it's definitely the thing I'm most proud of since I've been there. There have been a lot of different like side projects, like who can't talk about like bringing The Godfather to 4K for the
Yeah.
50th anniversary. That was
Yeah.
insane,
Yeah.
right? So there have been some like great fun projects, and then lo and behold, working on Star Trek: The Motion Picture and doing the director's edition justice.
Full circle.
I mean, that it's all full. It's bizarrely full circle, but it's also like, yeah, oh, I know this. I want to do this, and to have both, like, this is what your job is, and then also like you really want to do it at a personal level is very rewarding as well. So
Yeah, that's amazing.
yeah,
And to give the archive team this extra layer of adventure in what they're doing
yeah,
too. I honestly, when I first started
so
working
good.
with Paramount, I had this preconceived notion that was informed by nothing. So it was this ignorant notion that I was going to be kind of just like a number on a line sheet. You know what I mean? Like
Oh,
just
okay,
a number coming
yeah,
in, and I found the complete opposite. I mean, everyone there has been
mm.
so incredible. The communication, the relationships you talked about when someone leaves,
Oh,
you stay in touch, and
oh yeah,
I mean, all of that's meant the world. And one of the greatest joys has been getting to team up with the archive team and digging deep on some
mm.
stuff where they're like, I'm not sure what we have. Let's go figure it out. And then they'll come out with this. What do you want to like? What do you guys want to do with this? And we've really uncovered some really incredible artifacts from history and been able to bring them
Yeah.
in on these things. It's been incredible.
Absolutely. But as you know, I mean, there's also some disappointment. There's not, you can't always do
Yeah.
everything. There's a lot of behind the scenes that people don't see. And so it's kind of nice to know that like everything has a reason and the backstory of everything is interesting. I've had I don't necessarily like disappointing projects because they're all interesting in their own little
Hmm.
ways, but it's you know it's such a breakneck pace as well. We're a very small
Yeah.
department that I think that keeps your mind occupied all the time. You don't have really a lot of time when if you have to cancel a title, like, you don't really have a lot of time to think over what that
Yeah.
is until maybe the weekend. You're like, "Ah, I can't believe we're not doing this,
Yeah.
from a personal level.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So do you think you've yet released your ultimate project? Is there one that you're still aiming at, hoping for, and that your
Mm.
heart just says, all right, maybe this is going to be the year?
Um, I, God, that's a good question. As much as I'd love to have something as big as the Friday 13th 8 movie collection in 4K UHD, because I think all fans want that,
Hmm.
they would love to see it. Um, I'm very happy with what we did with Shout Factory and what we're able to do. Um, but that is a low hanging fruit. I would say like that would be amazing. Like if we can finally get to a point where like because we've done Star Trek, like we've gotten all 10 Star Treks done and out,
Right.
and it's 60th anniversary in 2026, and we have a new movie in pre-production, and it's one of those things where like for horror fans, this is one of the holy grails. So that would be very very nice if we can pull it off in some way, preferably before a 13th movie is made
Yeah.
by whoever does make it.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So that would be kind of fun. We do have this cool new thing now that as you know, you wrote the intro in Fangoria magazine, the Paramount Scares brand, which is a way of connecting to horror fans a little bit more transparently and having fun with the huge back catalog, especially with all the Miramax titles. And getting to be a little cheeky, we're going to be at Midsummer Scream this year, which is really
Cool.
exciting. We're going to have movies back in cinemas. We just announced The Crow is going to be back in theaters at the end of May.
Hmm.
And it's actually under the banner of Scream Greats, which is something we talked about back in the
Awesome.
day.
Amazing.
So, yeah, just like all those things are real, like kind of Easter eggs for the fans of the genre. So the more horror stuff that we can do, you know, the happier it is
Yeah.
over in my neck of the woods. So,
Well, I think
yeah.
it's really appreciated in all circles that I run in. People have been so excited about how you've been handling the catalog and the re-releases. The fact that they're given the kind of love and treatment that a mega budget contemporary film would be. Taking the time to put something out in the 4K or in the collectible steelbook and
Yeah.
stuff like that. That really means a lot. The scares thing meant a lot to
I
fans.
can't take full credit. Yeah, I mean, I can't take full
Of
credit, as you know,
course.
as like a lot of people
Yeah.
behind the scenes. But at the end of the day, to be the person that like helps get it greenlit and gets the ball rolling and and brings it to that format so that there is sort of a little bit of film preservation in that. And that's the stuff that I love the most. So that it is definitely the most rewarding.
Yeah.
And we bring things to digital as well. It's not as tangible, but like the fact that like next week on Tuesday we're launching Foul Play, and that's been out of print. You can't stream it. It's not been on television. Like
That's great.
it's just been out of distribution. So for that to come back is pretty exciting
Yeah.
as well. Like from film distribution kind of perspective.
Before we hop off here, there's all this
Yeah.
discussion all over the place, not just fans out there, but also within the business about the future. And we're in this period of
Mm.
incredible transition happening so fast all the time. And with the streaming thing, you just mentioned streaming. This is a nice
Mm.
dovetail. How do you foresee the future and the marriage of a physical media with the streaming world, and how those,
Mm.
because how those worlds can, like, is there a bridge between the two? Because it seems almost like a lot of physical media fans are carrying the banner and definitely out
Mhm.
there preaching the gospel
Yeah.
about it, because it really is film preservation. I always maintain the simple statement:
Hmm.
physical media is film
Yeah.
preservation. What do you see as the future
Sure.
for these
At
things?
a mass level.
Yeah.
Yeah, at a mass level, right? Like the true film preservation, of course. Let's not discount are the folks in Rochester, Kodak,
Oh,
or
of
like
course.
the folks that are actually really literally preserving films
Absolutely.
before they disappear forever, that sort of thing, and having it for the future and stuff like that. That's not to say there's going to be 8K, right?
Hmm.
Like, yeah, jury's still out on what the next thing is for physical
Right.
media, but it is an incredible time for physical media because it's a celebratory. Um, it's the best way to explain it. It's like a celebratory action that movies are coming out on physical media that you never in 1,000 years would have thought would get any kind of
Yeah.
remastering, let alone the best format that's out there. So we have a lot of third-party sub-licensees to thank for things like that. Obviously, the Criterion Collection is up
Hmm.
there as the oldest and one of the best. But so it takes a village. But as far as the line between streaming and physical, there are really three things. There's digital, which is transactional, and digital EST and iVOD, so to buy or rent. That's in my wheelhouse. I have nothing to do with streaming.
Right.
Streaming, everyone has their own opinion on. I love Shudder personally. I have even some of the studio or media company streaming platforms like Peacock. I'm actually a fan of. I love the assortment. I love the ability to watch a lot of those
Yeah.
things. As far as my preference, I prefer to own them. I prefer to have them available, and physical is the way that you always have them available. But the convenience of having the EST, the digital, is also very nice. So as far as the crossroad, like the bridge between the two, I like the bridge between physical and digital. That's why we have digital copies in our product,
Right.
so you have that convenience of always being able to take it on the road with you or watch it when you don't have the hardware to play it on. But when it comes to streaming, it's a very temporary thing. It's not always going to be on that streaming
Yeah.
site. And it's very, very confusing to the consumer what is where at any given time. So part of my job on the digital side of things is making sure that the availability of those titles is there and that it grows. So that the example of that would be Foul Play, but also like Better Off Dead. We went through a whole music clearance. We're working on Kids in the Hall Brain Candy right
Cool.
now, which has been out of print forever. Things like that still is film preservation. Luckily, we have brought those titles to Blu-ray in the past, and that was part of a different effort. But that gives enough fish in the pond for people to be entertained with.
Yeah.
And I think that's great. I can't really comment on a bridge between streaming and physical media because it's just such a temporary thing. It's the most successful streamers are the ones that are actually
Yep.
curating it. You know, it's like the Criterion Channel or Shudder or you know even Canopy
Hmm.
is great. Like it's free, or you get it with your
I love
library,
it.
card.
Yeah.
So like, there's just no end to that kind of availability. So how can you complain about it, really?
Right.
I mean, you can complain about picture quality, but like, how can you complain about selection?
Right.
You know?
Well, Todd,
So
thank you
yeah,
so much for taking some time to chat here. I mean, we always talk
yeah,
off the
of
record about,
course.
and our side road conversations are always so much fun. So this has been awesome.
Oh, cool. Yeah, absolutely. It's always fun to share stories. Anytime.
Now available at justinbeam.com is the CD from Steve Reverb and the Sound Tones, the surf rockabilly band Justin played drums for. This limited edition remaster features 16 tracks for just $10. Order now and get a free Reverend Entertainment sticker or magnet. justinbeam.com.
Todd is such a fascinating person who's done so much over time. It's a real thrill to team up with him and the entire internal team at Paramount. And I hope you enjoyed that chat that we had. As you can tell, this was recorded prior to the announcement of Bringing Out the Dead. Otherwise, we would have been gushing about that in this conversation. We kind of had to dance around it a little bit, but he has been instrumental in making that happen and was so eternally patient as we put all the pieces together on this. So thanks again to Todd for being on the show and also for his patience with what I feel is the release I am proudest of. On to voicemails. I have a couple that were left after the last episode aired. That was with Chelsea Wolf drummer Jess Gowrie. And let's get to that first one here.
Justin Beahm, this is Scotty from the Fun with Horror podcast. Just wanted to say a few things. Number one, I once heard the saying that my heroes may not be your heroes, and I think that might be true because you, my friend, are definitely one of my heroes. I've been fascinated and a little obsessed with bonus features on laser discs, DVDs, Blu-rays for a long, long time. And when I found out that you and Reverend Entertainment had done the bonus features for the Friday the 13th collection, otherwise known as the greatest Blu-ray box set ever made, well, you, my friend, became a very big hero to me. And then it turns out that a lot of the Blu-rays that I have, Reverend Entertainment had a hand in doing the bonus features for. So it's just amazing. Number two, I just wanted to say thank you again for your message on our 100th episode last year. It was really nice. It meant a whole lot to both Andrew and I. And as we've mentioned in the past, I'm really looking forward to hopefully having you on the podcast someday, hopefully soon. And number three, I am so happy that the Justin Beahm Radio Hour is back. You have a gift for talking to people and for talking to us. And your last episode with Jess Gowrie was such a good episode, and I'm looking forward to listening regularly. So keep doing what you're doing, and thank you so much for what you do for physical media and for all of us movie fans out there. We all love you, and you're awesome. And talk to you soon, Justin. Bye-bye.
Scotty, thank you so much for calling in. I'm really at a loss for words with your compliments. Wow. I love your show, Fun with Horror. You and Andrew do a tremendous job on there. And it was absolutely my honor to call in and leave a little message for your 100th episode. Here I am at 30. A landmark for me, but ancient history to you guys. And I just want to say I really appreciate your support and absolutely can't wait for your next 100. Thank you for all you guys do for horror and for fandom with the conversations you guys have. And regarding being on the show, man, just shoot me a message. I would love to be on. It would be a real honor.
This is Christian Day saying that the Justin Beahm Radio Hour is K-Day approved. Also, is your refrigerator running? You should go check.
Christian, thank you so much for calling in. Christian and I go way back. He's done some editing for me in the past. He's also more so been a real lighthouse for me, a guiding light in the production realm here in Iowa and beyond. Much of the equipment decisions I've made on things I had to buy are with Christian's advice, and he continues to be a real source of inspiration for me. He has a weekly show, which is also a podcast, called the Iowa Basement Tapes, where he has featured some of my bands and always features great artists from the state here. Absolutely worth digging into. Also, Christian and I have a documentary project that we're working on that I'll be talking about more in the near future after it gets a little further along. But it's definitely happening, and it's a really exciting topic that's close to my heart. Christian has been behind a lot of shows that are on different streaming services, most recently The Last American Gay Bar documentary. He did one called Turn Yourself In, which is coming out this summer. And he also has done The Meth Queen, about this crazy story of this lady in Iowa running basically a meth factory out of her bar, and a bunch of other stuff. He just is one of these investigative minds that is always looking for fascinating stories wherever they may be. And it's a true honor to team up with him on everything that we do. Christian, thank you so much again for calling in, and I will check on my refrigerator.
Whoa. Okay, you can edit that part out. The film that I love to introduce people to is a film from 2006 called The Fall. It's an adventure fantasy film. It was directed and co-written by Tarsem Singh, and it is basically a fairy tale. There's some CGI, but most of the shots were actually real, and it was filmed, I think, in over 30 different locations around the world. So the total budget for the film was $30 million, and it brought in worldwide only $3.7 million for various reasons. I'm assuming just because of the I don't know why, to be honest, but I think there was a lack of distribution and promotion kind of thing, because it really is a wonderful movie. It's got an innocence to it. There's a darkness to it. There's tragedy to it. There's some funny elements. It just has a lot of everything to it. Maybe that's why it couldn't really be promoted a certain way, but it is like an action adventure thing, but it's not action adventure like, American cinema or anything like that. It's very much a, kind of a worldview kind of film, and it's just beautifully shot. The cinematography is insane. If anyone's a filmmaker listening to this and you haven't seen this film, please watch it. Even if you don't do this genre, it'll inspire you. And they use a lot of Beethoven in it, which, how can you go wrong, right? So The Fall, 2006. There are a couple other movies called The Fall from that era. So just make sure it's the one. I don't know if the actor's name is Lee Pace or Lee Pace, but it stars Lee Pace or Lee Pace. And like I said, it was made in 2006. It was released in the UK and the US in 2008. And it's currently not on any streaming services, which is one of my things, why I always tend to try and buy a physical product if I really like it, because I think what most people don't understand about streaming, at least the average consumer, is that all of this stuff is licensed to these streamers, and if it's not licensed, then it's not shown, and or if a license expires, it goes away, right? So physical product is, call me old-fashioned, but if I find something wonderful, I like to have it.
Thank you, Tim. Right after I think he left this voicemail, he sent me some links to trailers and stuff for The Fall, and it's absolutely something I'm going to track down. I remember that cover image I remember it being in video stores, and it's something that I'm going to have to check out here. Tim and I go way back as well. This is really kind of a bunch of great calls from people who are so close to my heart. Tim was the composer on You Can't Kill the Boogeyman, which is the documentary that I had before the 2012 theatrical re-release of Halloween, 1978. And Tim and I have known each other for many, many years. And whenever I'm in Los Angeles, I try to get together with him, even if it's just for a coffee or something. And that sound you heard at the beginning there is our bushwhacker call. For those who were fans of the WWF back in the day, you'll recall the bushwhackers love to go, whoa! And so, as is the case with many of my friends, it's one of the shorthand kind of like greetings that we give each other whenever we're leaving a voicemail or we get each other on the phone. And it's just goofy shit. I don't know how to explain it any other way, but I love Tim so much. He did some scoring on some early episodes of the Radio Hour too. So if you turn back to some of the early episodes from a few years ago, you'll get to hear a little bit of Tim's work in there. Unfortunately, You Can't Kill the Boogeyman isn't available anywhere right now, but I do hope to do something at least with the audio on that on an upcoming episode of the Radio Hour, because I also had my buddy Andrew Devoff in the studio to do the voiceover on that, and he did just an incredible job. Tim was also the engineer on Andy's voiceover session, and I'll never forget sitting in this little booth with Tim at the controls and Andy right next to me, and my script on this big screen in front of us, hearing Andy over and over again talking about the cultural presence of the boogeyman and how that translates into the story and legacy of Michael Myers in film in the United States. Just an honor to have you as a friend, Tim. I love you dearly. Thank you so much for calling in, and I will check out The Fall, and I hope others do too.
Hey, Justin, it's your buddy Josh from Nebraska. So I've got two that I'm going to actually share. One is High Tension, Alexander Asia. Absolutely love that movie, even though there are some gaps in the logic, maybe big enough to drive the van through at times. It still sets a mood. It is very creative with what it does, in my opinion. And, you know, suitably gory for a nice horror movie. I really enjoy that, and I like introducing folks to that. The other one that I have is actually one you introduced me to, and that is the cinema classic Blood-Sucking Freaks. Can't get enough of Sardu and Ralphus. It's kind of what it's a successor to the H.G. Lewis stuff that I like so much. You know, Blood Feast and Wizard of Gore, all of that. I don't know. It's more a litmus test. If you like Blood-Sucking Freaks, then you're you're okay in my book. So anyhow, those are mine. Sorry for babbling. We'll talk to you later. Thanks.
Josh had called in on the previous episode as well. Thank you for calling in. And man, great choices there for High Tension and Blood-Sucking Freaks. High Tension is one of my all-time favorite, most memorable theater-going experiences. When that landed, there was a theater that had just opened near me when I was living in East Moline, Illinois. And I just wanted to see something there. It was literally like the first weekend that they had opened their doors, and I didn't know anything about High Tension whatsoever. All I saw was that the genre was horror. So I showed up in the theater on that opening night and was absolutely mesmerized. I remember people getting up during the screening and leaving. I remember the silence from the audience when the credits were done rolling as everyone sort of shuffled out. I think there may have been only about 5 or 10 other people in the theater that night. I think we lost half of them during the screening, but I left completely obsessed. And there are some great releases of High Tension on video that most recently include a beautiful Blu-ray box set from Second Sight Films that I can't recommend enough. It's got a thorough booklet with it, lobby card reproductions, of course, the film on Blu-ray and DVD, and in a gorgeous box that looks great sitting on the shelf. I don't really care about the logic problems in that movie. People bring that up all the time when I talk about this film, but I'm like, man, the ride is so great and so beautifully presented. I can't say enough good things about High Tension, and that's a great choice, Josh. As far as Blood-Sucking Freaks, I'm honored to have been the one to introduce you to that. Man, that is a singular experience, that movie, and certainly one that is a regular October revisit for me. Thank you again for calling in, Josh. I hope we hit the ice together again soon.
Hey, Justin, it's Bill Van Bagel from Land of the Creeps podcast. I'm sitting here enjoying the lovely weather. I'm one of these people that enjoy the heat, because living in Canada, it's so bloody cold for like 9 months of the year that I'm never going to complain about heat. So that's just the way it is. But I also love the fact that I'm getting ready tomorrow to watch Stanley Cup Finals Game 6. Go Oilers. I know you will be too. Anyways, I know I'm getting off topic. A movie that you love to introduce to people. Well, most of the people listening here are going to be cinephiles. And so a lot of times when I have friends come to me or people I meet online or in discussions on Land of the Creeps, and they ask, what is a movie that most people haven't seen to claim to have seen everything? Because that's really what we're asking. I have a couple that I usually have in my file folder. The one I usually pull out is 1971's 10 Rillington Place. Thriller, horror, crime drama, police serial killer movie, but not in a way that you're probably used to seeing. The protagonist / enemy is a man in his 70s. He might be 5'2". Okay, 70s may be a bit harsh. He might be in his 50s. But he's a small man, unassuming, quiet, played brilliantly by Sir Richard Attenborough. Of course, he wasn't a Sir at the time. And it's post-war England, an individual who's kind of slipped through the cracks, gone through various jobs at the post office and in the military, who's performing backdoor abortions and killing women who are very vulnerable and hiding them in the house. Now, brilliant acting, a young John Hurt, a great performance by Judy Geeson, and Richard Attenborough's low voice that's going to scare the crap out of you from a man who's maybe 5'5", 150 pounds. Trust me when you watch it. If you've never seen 10 Rillington Place, do it. Not only is it a good movie, but it's based on a true story that changed the way British law was written up after it. I'm not going to see any more. Watch the film. The other film I bring up when somebody says, I want something a little bit more lighthearted, a lot of people love Chevy Chase, and everybody always thinks of National Lampoon's Vacation or Funny Farm for good reason, or even a Saturday Night Live stuff. I can quote Fletch, line for line verbatim, pretty much with me and my buddies sitting around. If you've had a few libations, a few puffs, or if you're just in a mood to want to hear something and watch something great, it's all about ball bearings these days. It's all about ball bearings. There's a certain generation out there now that doesn't get to see many comedies because they just aren't out there in the landscape within the cinematic universe these days. I'm not sure why. Perhaps just in a good episode could be exploring why comedies have gone the way of the dodo bird. But anyways, Fletch, classic comedy. Is it the most politically correct? No. But what I like about it is that it's not just slapstick or boob jokes or people falling over. There's a backdrop to it. There's a detective angle element to it. There's a police and journalistic aspect to it. So check out 10 Rillington Place. Check out Fletch. And Justin, go Oilers. Let's go.
Bill Van Vegel, thank you for calling in. I'm eternally a family member over at Land of the Creeps, and I appreciate hearing your voice again. 10 Rillington Place, a movie that I had absolutely no idea about. I am a big fan of director Richard Fleischer, who did Soylent Green, Red Sonja, Fantastic Voyage, and most importantly, directed my favorite Disney film of all time, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I'm 100% on board for checking this movie out, and I appreciate the reference there. I remember going to Disney when I was a kid, prior to them removing or actually replacing the 20,000 Leagues ride with, I think it turned into The Little Mermaid, but I got to ride in the Nautilus subs that they had set up and experience 20,000 Leagues as best you could at that point, as close to the real deal as you could get back in those days. And it is my most treasured memory of going to Disney, other than the Haunted Mansion, of course. So I really appreciate the reference and the advice on checking out 10 Rillington Place. And when it comes to Fletch, man, just a classic. I'm a huge Chevy Chase mark. I know he just about drove John Carpenter out of the business when they did Memoirs of an Invisible Man together. But this time of year, boy, the vacation films are regular watches for me. And I'm always down to revisit anything Chevy has done. Fletch is one that I think many people would agree is one of his high water marks. Absolutely. I was just in Los Angeles a couple days ago, well, last week, shooting and recording a bunch of stuff for some upcoming projects, and I encountered Chevy Chase Avenue there. It's like, if you have a street in Los Angeles named after you, I think you've done something right. So thank you again, Bill, for calling in, and those two great references, 10 Rillington Place and Fletch. Make sure to follow the Radio Hour podcast on Facebook and me as well. In both places, I'm always going to post the new topic for those voicemails. So keep your eye open for next week's topic. And thank you to everyone who called in on this one. Thank you for listening to the Radio Hour podcast. We will talk to you next week.
You have been listening to the Justin Beahm Radio Hour. The Radio Hour is a production of Reverend Entertainment, copyright 2024. All rights reserved.